And we're on air. Hooray. Let me double check the interwebs and see what's happening there. Oh, I need to go in and remove the standby message. Awesome. So I'm going to start this up in another screen so I can see the chat as it comes up. Awesome. Well, this is oddly quiet. We have fewer people today, so this is me and Steve Sanderson on the ASP community stand-up. So I'm going to be sharing some community links. Steve's going to be showing off some updates for the SPA templates, and we'll be happy to take any questions. So it's great. All right. So let me share my screen, and we'll just get right to it. This is so strange for me. I'm used to people interrupting me all the time.
Sorry, I'll try and do
that. All right. So first of all, we have a post from Dan Roth on the ASP.NET team, and this is about preview 1 of ASP.NET MVC 5.2.4, Web API 5.2.4, and Web Pages 3.2.4. And the big thing here is Web API client support for .NET Standard. So showing how you can use Web API client and calling into ASP.NET Core, and using all the .NET Standard goodness there with the code sample and all that. So that is cool. Next, we have a few kind of like debugging perf analysis tips. So this one's from Benjamin Perkins. Always great stuff from him. So this one is on capturing an ASP.NET Core memory dump on Azure App Service. So in this case, he shows publishing to App Service and then going out to Kudu and digging into Process Explorer and capturing a full dump, and then what you can do with that. So that is handy. We also have one on perf view traces from Naveen. So this is an example showing some code here, logging some things out, writing in some debug and logging commands, and then actually going in and capturing the perf view trace. So that also handy. I have to admit, I don't really know much about Perfu. I've dabbled with it a few times, and it gets over my head pretty quick. But it's neat anyhow.
What does it do, Perfu? Is it capturing sort of performance telemetry over time, or do you just see an instantaneous snapshot of what's going on right now, or what?
Honestly, I think that this is more instantaneous. This is point in time. But like I said, the extent of my Perfu knowledge, and maybe somebody watching can jump in, the extent of my Perfu knowledge has been when I've been running into some problem and someone would say, can you capture Perfu for me or something?
Okay.
That's about it. So
okay.
This is cool here. This is CodeTrack. This is a free profiler for .NET. And some new thing, there's a nice 1-minute video, like literally 1 minute, which is really, cool, tight, quick explanation of what it is. The neat thing with this release is that it supports plugins. And so, there's some examples of plugins and showing the console plugin here. So this is actually as part of the, it captures the console output. But then part of the reason I'm mentioning it here is that he's asking for some help creating plugins. So specifically here, we've got some ASP.NET experts watching. So anyone that's got ideas or would like to create a plugin, there are some example plugins. Like I said, there's this console plugin here. And so this is an example of, you can look at that code and you could potentially create your own plugin. So it'd be interesting to see what people can come up with. And, this is free. It's out on GitHub. It's pretty cool. This is from Elton Stoneman. So Elton is a dev evangelist at Docker and does a lot of great stuff with ASP.NET. So this is kind of an in-depth look at connecting to database containers. So that can be a little tricky, how you handle the networking. So explanation about, how the NAT works and DNS, and, how you can configure that in a little more depth inside your Docker file. So, and digging into things like default password and custom password and stuff. So a lot of good stuff. This from Jeremy. He's looking at 5 RESTful web design patterns in ASP.NET Core. So there are different styles and kind of patterns that people use around REST and RESTful web design patterns. So here he kind of goes through them with some implementations. Nice thing here too, some diagrams as well. So kind of explaining how these are architected, and showing at the end, or kind of all throughout actually, digging in with Swagger and showing how, accessing them. Last one I wanted to point out is just something that's kind of neat. This is Mark Rendell tried out an experiment. This is called Beeline. And what he wanted to look at here was serializing to JSON directly using the new using span and kind of all the new goodies in .NET Core 2.1 and C# 7.2. And so, with direct serialization, writing directly out to JSON, he was interested to see kind of what would his performance be like. So he's got some benchmarks in here, and he said, he was hoping for better. He ended up about 10% faster and a little bit lower allocation than Dapper. So, it's as he said, it's not a clear, amazing winner, but it's, not a total loss of time here. Could be useful for things like very tight microservices or stuff like that. So just neat to see the experiment, and I'm glad that he showed that off. So
yeah, it makes me wonder at what point it would become useful to switch over to storing the JSON in the database. I'm sure SQL Server has got facilities for doing that.
Yeah, and that is something that people asked him on Twitter when he was discussing it. And that is true. There, Postgres, SQL Server, there are different things with that. I think he had said some of the thing here was that, like storing it directly without even kind of handling it. Like, for instance, if you want database portability, there's some things with JSON storage syntax in different databases is different, so you kind of have to plumb directly into that database, whereas this is kind of writing direct JSON output.
Yeah, I suppose it might depend a bit on how relational your data schema is and to what extent you're relying on lots of cross-table joins and that kind of indexing. I don't even know how good SQL Server is at doing, say, indexing on specific paths within JSON blobs and so on. I'm sure they've done something in that area, but
yeah,
it's not my area.
Exactly. I've kind of read the docs, but it's been a while. So cool. Well, so I'm all done. Let's hop over to you. So you had a release candidate update to the SPA templates, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we've got some SPA templates that are already shipping in ASP.NET Core 2.0. They're included in the .NET Core SDK 2.0. But they've satisfied a lot of people. But also, more recently, we've been getting a lot of people saying, "Hey, these templates, the Angular one, why doesn't it use Angular CLI? And the React one, why doesn't it use Create React app and so on?" Because these SPA frameworks, increasingly, people are standardizing on particular toolchains when they're building their Angular app. They are increasingly using the Angular CLI. It's just one sort of standard system that allows everyone to know how a project should be structured and to share a set of infrastructure for building it. So we got this message pretty clearly from the community that you wanted us to have our templates for Angular based around Angular CLI and so on. And so that's what we've been doing over the last little while. We released a preview of some updated templates that worked that way a couple of months ago. And then just last week, we released a release candidate of those same templates. So we're just about ready for that to ship now. So I can show you a little demo of what these updated templates look like, if you would like. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. It'll be coming up kind of now-ish. Okay, I'm just going to, okay. Can't see my mouse pointer. There we go, turning off my video. Great. All right, and so I've got these templates installed. So they are templates that are built into the .NET New system. So if I type .NET New, then you will see that I've got ASP.NET Core with Angular, React, React, and Redux. Those are exactly the same names as the existing templates that I've already shipped, but I have installed the updated template packages. If you want to install the template packages yourself, you can go to the following web page. You can go to, let's see, where is it now? It's in, so on the ASP.NET docs, if you follow the links into the client-side development pages, then assuming that that site is actually working, which it might not be right now. Here we go. Right. You will see the using the SPA project templates release candidate. If you go into there, it will give you the relatively small bit of instructions that you need in order to install that. You just run that command on the command line, and then you'll get these updated templates. So I've used this to create an Angular and a React template that I'm going to show you just now. And in fact, I'm going to do that in Visual Studio. So here's my Angular application, and I'm going to do a Control F5 just to get that started up. And that'll take a couple of seconds to come up. What you'll see when that does come up is that it looks quite similar to the projects that we had before with the existing project templates. It's really the implementation that's changed, not the initial appearance of it. It does take a few seconds to come up, and I'm going to explain why that is in a moment, and I'll show you a way that you can make it start faster if you want to. But for now, let's just do it the default way. It's taking a little longer than usual. A lot longer than usual. There we go. All right, I think my my laptop is suffering badly from being on this Google Hangouts for some reason. Yeah. Anyway, okay, so the application comes up. It looks similar to what we had before. It's another Bootstrap type layout where you can do backwards, forward, and so on. We've got simple examples of an Angular component, for example. We've got an example of fetching some data from the server. But what's different from before is the structure of the project, in particular, the contents of this client app directory. And if I just open this in Windows Explorer, you will see, if you've ever used the Angular CLI to create an Angular CLI project, you might recognize this particular file structure, because this is exactly what comes out. We've got end-to-end testing here, we've got sourcing here, we've got all these many different config files that are all generated by Angular CLI. Because that is what the Angular part of this application actually is. It's a standard Angular CLI application. We haven't made any changes that are specific to ASP.NET inside this. We've added a little bit of content, and that's where these different pages are coming from, but we haven't changed anything about how it actually works. So the files in this folder are an Angular CLI application. They've got exactly the same capabilities. Every tutorial that you can find on the internet about how to do stuff with Angular CLI is all going to work with this, because it is a standard Angular CLI project.
Okay. So like you're saying, I can go through anything I read, any Stack Overflow answer or whatever that I'll find with Angular CLI, then I can run in and run that against this code.
Yeah, absolutely. Every third-party package, everything is going to work the same, because it is the same. Like, it can't not be the same. It's the same bytes. It's going to be the same. And that means that we can do things like run the Angular tools on the command line if we want to. So if I go into this client app directory in a console prompt here, then I can use ng, the Angular console tool, to run any of the different Angular commands that there are. Like, for example, I can run ng-lint, and that's going to run the standard set of linting rules of my code base there and tell me that they're all looking good. I could do things like run ng-test, and that will use the Angular compiler to compile my project. And when it has compiled it, it's going to automatically pop open a web browser there, and it's going to send my application's unit tests into the browser there. and you can see it's executed 2 of 2, and we're happy it's all working correctly. I can also do other types of tests, like I can run end-to-end tests. That's a built-in thing that comes out of Angular CLI. That's also going to compile and launch a browser. But unlike before, it's not just running individual components in isolation. It's now actually running the entire application and automating the browser to click around on the UI inside there. And as you can see, it's run a test there, and that succeeded. So we can do everything with this that you can do with a normal Angular application. And so you might think, okay, well, is the point of that then? Why is that beneficial? Why don't I just create an Angular CLI application myself? Why do I need your special template? And the answer is just that a lot of people find it convenient to have a single project that they work on that contains both the client-side part of the single-page application and any API methods that it relies on, so that you can build it all at once. You can have one atomic version for it. You can deploy it as one atomic unit, and you can do so using just one set of tools. And so that's what this gives you. It's a convenience if that's useful to you. So, for example, if you want to fetch data from your ASP.NET Web API backend, then you can do that just using the Angular HTTP API, give it a URL that corresponds to an endpoint on the back end there, and you will just get your data, and you don't have to deal with things like cores or launching multiple web servers to have them communicate with one another on project. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah, so this handles all the stuff like routing and dealing with front end and back end routes and that kind of stuff too, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it means that you create one project, you do one thing to start your project running, and you've got both the front end and the back end running simultaneously. And yes, we've set up all the relevant conventions to make sure that the front end and back end routing stuff all works together.
So one thing that when I looked at the kind of earlier releases of this, there was work involved so that Webpack was running, and when it was doing the bundling, like if I requested a file and it was still being built, it would, there was a whole virtual path provider or whatever, or that kind of thing, virtual file provider. Is that still involved there, or has that changed with the CLI integration?
Okay, good question. So let me show you another change that we've made here, because there's another sort of major architectural difference to these updated templates, which is that they are not coupled to ASP.NET MVC anymore. They now just use low-level ASP.NET concepts. So it doesn't matter whether you want to build an MVC site or a Razor Pages site or your own weird thing on top of ASP.NET primitives. It's all going to work the same, because the way it's all set up now is using middleware. And that is how we can control the build system, which is what you were just getting at there. So now if we look inside the startup CS, you'll see that we've got, under the normal use MVC, we've got use SPA, and that's going to deal with receiving requests to the server that are supposed to render the client-side application. So for any unrecognized URL, that is all URLs that are not matched to the normal routing system that you're using on the server, which in this case is MVC, but wouldn't have to be, they are all going to serve the default page for the single page application. And you can control where on disk that is coming from. And what I've also got here is this little block of code that says, if we're running a development environment, then instead of assuming that the Angular application has already been compiled, I'm going to start up dynamically an instance of the Angular CLI server, and I'm going to pass through any requests to that. So that is how the application is getting compiled. And it's a little easier to see, actually, if I run it on the command line rather than just launching it from VS there. So I'm going to just kill my web server instance there and go back to a command line. And if I run .NET run now, you'll see that, well, first it's going to compile the .NET code as usual, then it will start that up. And so now I've got an ASP.NET application that's actually listening. But while that is starting up, you'll see that it's starting the Angular development server in the background, which is doing all the build process for us. And if I start trying to load my page now, you'll see it's not coming up immediately. This is what we were waiting for before. We were waiting for the Angular CLI to finish doing this build. And when it's finished doing that, which takes 5 seconds or so, or longer if you're on a Google Hangout for some reason, then it comes up in the web browser there. So that's one of the various ways that we're guaranteeing that behavior is exactly the same as a standard Angular CLI application, because we're using the Angular CLI server amongst all the other things there.
Got it. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does. Thank you.
Good.
So
All right.
that seems more both integrated in and kind of straightforward as far. Yeah. So cool. So we have a few questions in the chat. One from Jim, he asked, will installing the RC template remove or break existing apps built with the older templates?
Okay, yeah, it will definitely not change existing applications that you've already created, because it's just a package of templates. It's not, the template package itself does not contain any runtime packages. Your projects that you create with it do use new runtime packages, but the fact that you're getting new runtime packages for those projects will not affect your other projects on your machine. One way it might affect you, however, is that you can only have one .NET New Angular or one .NET New React command installed within a given .NET SDK at a given time. So if you then want to create a new Angular project, then you would have to remove the new templates if you wanted to create a new one with the old templates.
Got it. Okay. Let me see. We have a question from Amut. He's asking, what is the advantage of Redux for isomorphic apps?
Okay. Wow, that's a very different subject. By isomorphic apps, I guess that he means to do with server-side rendering. So the idea is that your code could run on the server as well as it could run on the client. And that is a feature that we have had in our previous templates for the Angular and React with Redux templates, but we did not have for the React template. I'll explain why that is, and then I'll also explain why we're changing this arrangement in the newer templates. So in the previous set of templates, we wanted to have it turned on by default wherever possible, because we figured that it's easier to turn it off than it is to turn it on. Like, anybody can just turn stuff off at any time they want to, but if you want to turn this stuff on, well, that relies on you not having done anything that makes it difficult to turn it on, not having relied on any assumptions that you won't be doing server-side rendering. So that's why it was on before. And previously, in the React world, we only had it on the Redux template and not the React without Redux template. And the reason for that is because the way that React server-side rendering works is that it relies on the idea that you can generate identical markup on the server to how you generate it on the client. And in order to do that, you have to be able to pass the state of your application from the server down to the client. And to pass the complete state of your entire application from the server down to the client, well, one very reliable way to do that is to use Redux. Redux is a way of centralizing all the state in your application into one place, and that makes it kind of trivial just to serialize out the Redux store, which contains all that state, from the server-side execution, embed that in the page, and then have the client-side code pick that up and continue the execution directly. And that guarantees that the state transfers and the application continues execution perfectly as it passes from server to client. Now, if you don't have Redux, how are you going to transfer that state from the server to the client? And the answer is you're going to invent your own really bad version of Redux. And so we figured, why would we do that? Why don't we just say, if you want to do this, you should be using Redux, because it's the only thing that really makes sense. Don't invent your own bad version of it when there's a standard thing out there that you can do. Now, if somebody wants to create their own custom alternative way of serializing the state from server to client, then they can go and do that, but it just didn't make sense to put that in the template. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay.
All right, good.
Yes.
but we're changing it, all right? So here's what's going to be different with the new templates. In the new templates, we will not have server-side rendering turned on by default. And we will not have any out-of-the-box straightforward way of doing it for React or React with Redux. We will only have it for Angular. Now, I know that sounds like 2 steps backwards, so let me explain why we're making those changes. Right, the reason why we are not turning on server-side rendering by default in the new templates is because it causes tons of difficulties for people, and most people don't need it. So the reason why most people don't need it is because most of the applications that people are creating with Angular and React are being served over people's intranets within some sort of corporation that has fast internet connections, and people are just accessing these business web applications on a desktop browser. And in that case, you don't get a lot of benefit from server-side rendering because the performance of starting up the application is really perfectly good anyway. Time from 0.2 of a second to 0.05 of a second, it doesn't make any real difference to human beings. However, it does make your development experience way more complex because it forces you to write your code in such a way that it can run in two completely different runtime environments. You have to write your code such that it works both under Node for server-side rendering and in a browser for client-side rendering. And those two runtime environments are different. They've got different capabilities. There are different APIs available, and people were constantly tripping up on this. The most common thing that people do is they try to use browser-specific APIs like window or local storage, that sort of thing. And then when it tries to run under server-side rendering in Node, that just gives you an exception because those APIs don't exist there. And so people are constantly getting troubled by that.
Okay. So it's the kind of thing where only pay that price if you really are going to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So for people who do want server-side rendering with the new templates, you can go into our documentation, let's say here for the Angular project template, and you'll see we've got this server-side rendering link down here. And it walks you through the process of exactly what code you need to add and why each part of it is needed so that you get server-side rendering in your application. And we hope that for the presumably 5% or so of people who want to do that, that will be a reasonably straightforward thing. Plus, it will give you loads of background information on what the restrictions are and what best practices are and so on. And so hopefully people will be in a better position with that.
What I really like with that is, as you pointed out there, it's explaining what specifically you're doing and why. That's a difficulty with a lot of these templates where it kind of code spews tons of code out there and you don't feel like you own it or understand it. So this seems really useful. Like you said, if you're going to use it, you need to understand and, like own the code so you're able to handle things if they're not working right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the other change is that we're not going to have this. There's no equivalent documentation for React. Now, there might be in the future, but there isn't today. And that is because the Create React App tooling that is the basis of the React template does not itself have any mechanism for building server-side rendering capable bundles. The Create React App project has just decided that it's out of scope for them. So there isn't any sensible way for us to enable that while also being consistent with Create React App conventions. So that's just how that is. If you want to change that, then please work with the Create React App people to get them to add at least the same level of support that Angular CLI does, and then we will be able to build on it. But until that exists, it will be up to developers to use the Create React App eject feature from the project, which converts it into a standard Webpack-based project, and then you can go through adding in all the extra Webpack config that's needed to build server-side rendering bundles. But that is outside the scope of what we're going to have in the default template.
Okay. All right. A few more questions here. Another one from Jim. He's asking if there will be any examples of doing authorization, including things like OAuth or O365 auth.
Yeah, good. Another good question. So that was going to be one of our top features in the 2.1 timeframe, but because we changed our focus completely to these new third-party tooling-based templates, that has dropped way down our priority list. So it's not currently on my to-do list, or it's not anywhere near the top anyway. So I'm not promising that that's going to happen anytime soon. It is something that we know would be a good thing to have, and we do want to have it. It's just that we're focusing on other stuff at the moment. So it would be great if anyone in the community who has figured out a method that they consider to be good practice that's applicable to other people's projects to put something up on the wiki inside the JavaScript services repo, or do a blog post or whatever, and then that would be really useful. And when we get to it, we would like to have some documentation around that, but it's just not done yet.
Okay. Let me see. Kind of related here from Badreddin asking question on auth workflow and state management like NGRX, if that's on the backlog. So you talked about auth workflow. I don't even know what NGRX is.
Okay, so well, NG is Angular and RX is reactive extensions.
Oh, okay.
So I have not used NGRX, and I can only just vaguely guess at what it does from its name, in that it must provide some kind of state container that exposes reactive APIs so that you can observe changes to the state. I'm guessing, but I might be wrong. I'm not really qualified to answer this question because I do not really know NGRX, and we don't have any specific plans to do anything with it. As a general principle, our goal for these new templates is to be as consistent as possible as what is the de facto standard for each third-party SPA framework. So in the world of Angular, that's Angular CLI. We don't aspire to do anything different from Angular CLI. It's just not desirable. Everything that we do that's different is going to trip people up, because every additional feature we add is going to be a thing that people don't know how to combine with third-party tutorials or whatever. So our goal is to stay completely consistent with what comes out of the box with Angular CLI, so that if you want to do Angular programming, you just do Angular programming. Like, you don't have to do special ASP.NET version of Angular. Like, we're not telling you how to do Angular stuff. You can go to Angular docs and become part of the Angular community and do whatever Angular people say, and it's all going to work the same, because we are just letting you do a standard Angular application.
Okay, cool. Question from John. He's asking, would it be possible to easy run the Parcel Bundler this way? So I hadn't heard of Parcel. That's another bundler, I guess.
Okay, well, I suppose that really fits in with the previous answer, which is it's as easy or as hard as it is to do it with the standard Angular CLI application.
Right.
I would hope that whatever tutorials you can find that say how to use Parcel with Angular CLI or with React Create React Apt, if that's what they are using, are going to work the same. If it doesn't work the same, then please file us a bug. But if it does, then yeah, you're doing standard SPA development now, and you don't need special support from us.
Okay. So we have a few people jumping in explaining what NGRX is. So I guess it's an opinionated Redux with all the extensions and first class support of reactive extensions for Angular 2+ apps. So
great.
Kind of as you guessed there. Yep. A question from Doug asking, any plans to add the Ember CLI?
We don't have an Ember template right now. We've had little to no demand for it. If there was another SPA framework that we were to focus on next, it would definitely be Vue, because there's far, far more demand for that than there is for Ember. But yeah, we're not currently got any specific schedule on expanding the number of SPA-based templates that we ship. We do have currently templates for Angular, React, React with Redux, Vue, Knockout, and Aurelia. However, the Vue, Knockout, and Aurelia templates are in a separate package that does not ship with the .NET SDK because there's a limited amount of capacity in the ASP.NET team for the wider team to understand all these third-party frameworks and to keep up to date with all the changes with them. So really, we want to enable the community that cares about a specific third-party framework to manage the templates and the packages for it. The .NET new system itself is fully extensible, so anybody who wants to ship a template of that can do so. All of the technology that we've used to create the Angular CLI-based project and the React with the Redux and the React projects are all in NuGet packages that you can consume and use to create your own template packages if you want to. And so I would really like to see whatever part of the community is enthusiastic about Ember to create an Ember template, and then we can promote it and we can say this is great. But yeah, we can't create one for every third party.
Right. Yeah, I played a bit with Ember more lately because of Glimmer, and it was I didn't quite get it all to work. Wasn't running on Windows for me at the time, but there's some interesting things with how they do serialization, that they like have this bytecode thing that they ship down to the browser, which was interesting. Right. Yeah. But okay, so now we're in we're getting some suggestions and wish list things. So Quintine is saying,
cool.
You'd like
do you want me to show you one last feature of these templates?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's do that.
Okay. All right. I just want to show this one last thing, because I think this might change a little bit of what people see as being the workflow for this. One thing I pointed out when I started it the first time was that it took 5 to 10 seconds to start up, and that's because it was running the Angular compiler in the background. Now, one issue with that is, let's say that you are making a load of C# code changes. Let's say you change your C# just as often as you change your TypeScript. Well, that would be kind of annoying, because every time you change your C# code, it's going to restart the ASP.NET application, which means it's then going to restart the Angular compiler and go through this 10-second compile process all over again. Now, that would be pretty annoying if every single C# code change forced you to wait for 10 seconds for the application to start. So one thing we've done to make it possible to be much faster still is that you can optionally run the Angular server or the Create React app server as a separate process in the background and just connect to it from your ASP.NET application. So you get exactly the same level of integration at runtime. You just don't have to keep restarting the Angular server or the React server. The benefit is obvious. It starts up much faster. The cost is that you have to manually start it up in a command prompt yourself. So let me show you how we can do that. I'm going to, let's go to a different console here. I'll go to my Angular app, and I'm going to go into client app here, and I'm going to run ng-serve. And that is going to start up the Angular server as a standalone process, and it's going to listen on this port, localhost 4200. Right, now I'm going to go back to my ASP.NET application. I'm going to shut that down, and I'll switch into my source code, and I'm going to say, okay, I don't want to use the Angular server anymore because I don't want to keep waiting for it to start up. Instead, I'm going to use proxy to spar development server, and I can give it the URL that it's listening on. So it's HTTP localhost 4200 by default, although you can make it run on other ports if you prefer. All right, so then now I'll go back over here and I'll do .NET run again. And this time when it starts up, it will, again, as usual, it will do the normal compiling of .NET code, and it's started up, but it's not starting up an Angular CLI instance in the background anymore. When I go to this URL, we'll see that it comes up just the same as before. And I've still got all the same integration as before. I've still got all the kind of features like live reloading and so on. So if I go and I modify, let's say this HTML here, let's say weather forecast, yay. And then I hit save on that, I'll switch back to my browser. We should see that automatically reload and update and everything. So I've got all the same integration as I have before. I just don't have to wait for it to start up. So it's entirely up to developers whether they want the convenience of it all starting up at once when they press Control F5, or whether they want to manually run a spar development server in the background and just proxy to it. And I think you can probably guess that this use proxy to spar development server is not tied to Angular or React or anything else. So if you start up an instance of Ember CLI, then you can proxy stuff to that in just the same sort of way if you want to.
Ah, that's very cool. Okay. So again, you can do all the, you can kind of think of them separately, but then when you want to have the advantages of things like live reload and all that, you still have that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we've still got the ability to run it as one instance if we want to. Also, we've got things like publishing is automatically set up for you. So if I run I won't do it now because it takes about 2 minutes to go through, but if you run .NET Publish on the command line, or if you run Publish from Visual Studio, then the CS proj is already configured to know how to build your spar framework by calling all the relevant scripts to produce a production build and package all the files in the right places. So yeah, you don't have to have two different parts of your workflow when it comes to publishing. Either it all just publishes as one unit as well.
Ah, cool. Okay. Cool. Let me see. A couple of more questions here, if it's okay to jump back to those.
Go for it, yeah.
I think that totally makes sense. So that's really useful what you just showed there. Here's a question. Can anyone tell me the difference between .NET New and Yeoman? So I think Yeoman is, well, you've had some history there on with the Yeoman side here.
Yeah. Okay, so Yeoman is a tool based on Node.js. It's a tool for generating projects. It can generate any sort of project, or rather it can generate any set of files on disk if somebody publishes a suitable template to npm. And so we used to have our SPA templates built on Yeoman because when we first started this project about 2 years ago, the only available option, and it was fairly standard, and it was quite convenient both for us to create those templates and for people using them to get them and use them that way. But since then, .NET New has become the standard way to create .NET projects. It knows specific things about .NET, such as how to restore dependencies and how to fetch templates from NuGet packages and that sort of thing. So since that has become standard, it made sense for us to switch over to shipping our templates on .NET New instead of on Yeoman. So we no longer maintain the Yeoman templates. We could maintain both Yeoman and .NET New templates at the same time if we wanted to, but there really is no point that I can think of because everybody who uses .NET must have the CLI. There's no way of not having the .NET CLI. Why wouldn't you use .NET New, really? That's our reasoning.
Okay, makes sense. Let me see. There's a question on they would like it to be easy to generate web API and client-side proxy, like going back a ways to WCF RIA services.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Yeah. Yeah, that would be nice. I agree, but we don't have that. Yeah, if someone's keen to come up with a design for how that should work and is interested in working with us on making that happen, then please file an issue on the JavaScript Services issue tracker, and we'll see if we can get somewhere with that. But it's not something that we specifically have any timescale on at this point.
Okay. Let me see. One slightly different question when I was, wondering about asking you too. A question about any work going on with WebAssembly.
WebAssembly, yeah. Well, we are well aware that WebAssembly is, sort of flooding out into the web development world, and every browser now supports it, and there's lots of opportunities there. I've personally been having some fun doing some prototyping of a .NET-based single-page application framework, and a lot of people have said they are interested in that. And so that is a thing we're talking about on the team and trying to figure out if and how we can do something with that. But we don't have any specific thing to show at this exact moment. But I really hope that at some point we can do something cool with that.
Okay. That's about it. I mean, there's a few other questions, but I think we've kind of covered things in pretty good detail. If people do have other questions on this going forward, what's a good way to check in with you? Is it file an issue on the repo or?
Yeah. So we've got the, I know it's really not obvious at all, and it's kind of a historical quirk, but the work on these templates is coordinated largely on this JavaScript services repo. Or at least if you post an issue there, I'm going to see it personally, even though the code for it is actually on this other repo, templating. So this is where the code actually lives. And if you post your issue here, it's going to get seen by my boss. If you post it here, it's going to get seen by me. So it kind of depends who you want to talk to, really. I suppose really the templating repo is the right place for any issues relating to this, because that is actually where the code is. The JavaScript services repo would be the right place to post stuff that relates to the actual .NET APIs. So the stuff that you saw me call from Startup CS. But I appreciate it's really hard to know which repo to post issues in. And that's one of the reasons why there's this move to move all the issues into one central repo.
Got it.
Okay. But for now, if you post it to anywhere, and we'll see it. Okay.
Well, anything else you want to show off, or should we wrap up there?
No, that's great. So I haven't shown the React templates at all because we didn't really need to. But you can just use your imagination and just substitute the word React for Angular in basically everything that we talked about, and it would be correct, because other than the server-side rendering feature, the exact equivalents are true for React with these templates.
And including they look the same, right? There's the counter and the weather tracker.
Yeah, they look exactly the same. And the implementation for the React standalone template is almost like looks the same in terms of the layout of files and so on. It's very, very similar. The Redux one is very different because Redux itself is a totally different type of architecture. And so which of those two you want to use really just depends on your own architectural preferences.
Okay, so just to kind of repeat what you showed at the very beginning, people want to try out what you're showing there. How do they get this? How do they update their templates?
Yeah, so if you go to the docs.microsoft.com into the ASP.NET Core section and find this, presumably if you just search Google or Bing for the ASP.NET Core single page application templates, it'll probably come up. But anyway, the installation step is just this one command. That's it. As soon as you run that, you've got the RC1 templates, and then you can create a new project. But you also lose the ability to create templates with the older templates package, and you would have to uninstall it if you want to use the older templates.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's it. So thanks a bunch for your time. This was fascinating for me, and it's exciting to see the kind of updates. And as I've used the templates in the past, it has been kind of like I felt like I'm often the ASP.NET version of Angular or React in the past because all the CLI and all that stuff didn't apply. It's exciting to see that now kind of all merge back together. So,
yeah, great.
Thanks. All right. Well, we'll wrap up there. Thanks a bunch, Steve.
Excellent. Thanks. Bye then.
Bye.